On behalf of the UCLA Pritzker Center, my name is Taylor Dudley. You will also see our students, Floor, Brittany, and Cheyenne, and our program coordinator, Ruby, on the screen as well. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 8th installment of our Community Speaker Series on COVID-19. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Ahab Liskin, a therapist with UCLA Ties for Families, and Cynthia Billy, an attorney with the Alliance for Children's Rights, to direct their adoption project. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers and invite them to introduce themselves, their roles with their respective organizations. We'll start with Cynthia. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everyone. Cynthia Billy, the director of the Foster Care Adoption Program at the Alliance for Children's Rights. I'm also the adoption attorney for the Alliance for Children's Rights. So I both direct the program, but also represent some of our families in finalizing their adoptions from foster care at Children's Court, and also supervise our large network of volunteer pro bono attorneys, train and supervise them on finalizing adoptions so that our program is able to sustain finalizing more than 1/3 of all Los Angeles County foster care adoptions. Our program at the Alliance finalizes adoptions for children as well as older youth and youth that are over age 18 up through the age 20, so-called non-minor dependents, the youth that have stayed in the extended foster care program. They're also able to be adopted. So our program helps those youth. In addition, we also help finalize adoptions for probation youth. Not a lot, but we are able to do those when they come through. And the Alliance for Children's Rights, in addition to working closely with the Children's Court, LA County DCFS, and all the many of the foster family agencies partnering to expedite adoptions in LA County, we also have a national focus through our National Adoption Day program, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And through that program, all around the country, courts finalize adoptions around National Adoption Day. There have been about 80,000 adoptions over the last 20 years through that program. UCLA graduate, so I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Cynthia. Ahab?
Yes, hi, I'm Ahab Liskin. Thanks for inviting me to participate. I'm a staff therapist with UCLA Ties for Families. I've worked with kids and families for over 25 years and about 12 years with UCLA Ties. And for those who don't know, UCLA Ties for Families serves young kids and youth, actually infancy to age 25, who are or were in foster care, kinship care, adoption from foster care, and we serve resource and adopted parents as well. We have specialized adoption-sensitive therapy interventions that we do. And then one of our real strengths is that we have a multidisciplinary team that's been together for a long time, and we work together collaboratively every week. And that includes therapists, social workers, psychologists, child psychiatrists, pediatrician, educational advocate, speech language, OT, in-home behaviorists, and mentors. So we have a lot of services that can come together regularly to help families.
Great. Well, we're so grateful to have both of you here today who can really speak to the range of issues impacting kids and families with respect to adoption and permanency during this time. For our next question, I'd like to start with Cynthia and ask if she can please outline some of the issues that are coming up with respect to adoption and permanency at this time.
Well, thank you, Taylor. Hi, everyone. There is a lot going on with COVID and the fears associated with protecting the health and safety of your families at a really difficult time. I think before specifically addressing COVID, I'll just back into it a little bit, just to give you a little bit of a broader context about permanency and adoption in LA County. up until March 19th when this hit and those stay-at-home orders went into effect and things like that. But just in general, as a lot of you know, LA County is the largest foster care system, and there are a lot of children in foster care, and a lot of children, as we came into this crisis, that already were, so to speak, waiting for adoption. And I think the most recent number we have right now is there's about 3,200 children for LA County that have been legally freed for adoption and that are in various stages after that to try to get their adoptions completed. 3,200 is a large number. And that's behind sort of a large number of, or backlog, if you will, of dependency cases already before a pandemic hit. And then this is also in a context where, while the number of children in the last couple of years has sort of been rising, it's been a time of change in the sense that we moved from old way of doing things to what's called resource family approval, RFA. The whole RFA process has taken a couple of years for LA County to implement, and I would say during that time, adoptions suffered a little bit in terms of sort of being delayed at the back end while everybody had to convert and be recertified. So I would say up until about mid last year, adoption started getting behind a little bit because of all those changes. And then so that's just one context I wanted to provide. But in that context, there's also been sort of a shortage of families. I hate to phrase it that way, but as we all know, there's a large focus, and the law requires looking at first to see if there's relatives or kin for children in foster care, but there's also very, very large need for more, non-relative foster families to step forward for this large number of kids that are waiting. So with those sort of two competing tensions, the other context I wanted to provide was the Alliance has been spending a lot of time in the last year preceding in 2019, right before this hit, with permanency work that we're doing with the Office of Child Protection, which is led by the former presiding judge, Mike Nash, under the impetus of a LA County Board of Supervisors resolution, where there was a realization that in LA County we need to place a larger urgency on permanency for the reasons I just described. And so the Board of Supervisors resolution charged all of us to come together to try to create a plan to increase permanency in LA County, and as a subset of that, specifically to try to increase adoption for older youth that have been waiting the longest in foster care and have the most barriers. So we've been doing a lot of work with that permanency work group to break down data in LA County where there's barriers, which populations, like the youth in APLA, the alternative permanency plans, I always get the pseudonym wrong, working to get permanency for them. So we're working on that. So in that context, along came the pandemic. And in that context of an already somewhat stressed system, that's probably an understatement. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a very substantial impact on completing adoptions. So from my perspective, I can't speak for DCFS and the FFAs, but I know through my work with them, obviously they're an essential service. Their work has continued. As you know, the CDSS has issued guidelines supporting doing work virtually as much as possible, things like that. Adoptive placements have continued. So workers for FFAs and DCFS continue to try to push those cases forward. It's challenging, of course, the same things that apply to you and I about social distancing, things like that affect their work, but that continues. The Alliance, we've continued our work, working remotely from home, but the biggest hit, the biggest problem is the courts. The courts have taken a substantial hit here in the sense that they closed under the general orders of the presiding judge on March 19th. All Los Angeles County courthouses were closed except for limited proceedings deemed to be essential or emergent. And that for children's court, as you know, children's court is where all the dependency cases are heard, including adoption finalizations. They've been limited since March 19th to only hearing dependency proceedings that involve detention of children or emergency child orders. Unfortunately, adoptions, under the rationale that the children are already in a safe placement, they're not going anywhere, those were deemed not to be essential. So they have not been able to hear adoptions. The matters that they are hearing at children's court, even there, is extremely limited. They've only have 8 judicial officers and 8 clerks, maybe it's 9, that are actually at the courthouse working on dependency matters. The plan, and I'm sorry this is going on long, I'm almost done. So since March 19th, it's been a very limited operation at children's court for the obvious reason that it's not safe. The stay-at-home orders, you have to limit the number of people gathered. And as we all know, children's court is a place of small waiting areas, small courtrooms. But the plan is to reopen to more to the public, the children's court on June 22nd. And, but even at that time, the presiding judge of children's court can only reopen on a phased basis and start hearing these 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 dependency matters that have backed up for the last 3 months. So in his phase-in plan, adoption hearings will not be heard for 220 to 270 days after June 22nd, which means February 2021. That's a very scary thought to many families that are waiting. And that is actually what is happening. And then just wrapping up, Taylor, what can we do about that? So what I can tell you that the Alliance has been doing, we've been strongly advocating directly with the presiding judge, Victor Greenberg, for basically three approaches. We argued adoptions are essential, and the overall presiding judge should amend his order and consider adoptions essential so that hearings can be scheduled now. That's not going to happen other than a very narrow carve out. They do now consider as essential adoptions for youth age 17 that are approaching their 18th birthday. Those will be scheduled for remote or telephonic adoption hearings in the essential functions courtroom. We've also talked to Judge Greenberg on a case-by-case basis. He will consider other emergent considerations, such as a family that is legitimately planned to move out of state or certain medical emergencies. He's allowing a remote adoption hearing for us for one of our cases that involves a 5-year-old child that needs a surgery badly. And it's much more helpful if they can be the legal parents to authorize those surgeries. So that will be done. Briefly, the 2 areas of advocacy where we're pushing Judge Greenberg are, can we do remote or telephonic adoption hearings for these families? So remember, the reason why Judge Greenberg, we cannot have normal in-court adoption hearings with the families and the children present. Okay, well, how about telephonic? So we did a legal analysis for him, and existing California law does allow adoption hearings to be done by teleconference or video conference through WebEx, which is how they're doing their dependency hearings. The families can appear that way. So, but the problem there is just a practical one. He's still saying he doesn't have the ability. He only has the 8 judicial officers and 8 clerks. So that's what's happening there. But secondly, what Judge Greenberg said was what would help would be if nothing has to be scheduled. If judges could simply, in chambers, finalize adoptions. And so we looked at that for him legally and came to the conclusion that existing law does not support that. The law does require an appearance before the judge of the adoptive family. However, under the emergency authority being the governor's order and the Chief Justice of California's emergency orders related to COVID, that the Judicial Council of California could adopt an emergency order, emergency rule authorizing these in-chamber finalizations, where basically the judge would finalize the adoption in chambers. The attorneys would obtain the signed adoption agreements in advance and go from there. So where that's landed is the Alliance helped draft language for that emergency rule and that process. And it's now under consideration by the Judicial Council, and I'm trying every day to nudge and urge for that. So to summarize, yes, caregivers, there is a problem, a substantial delay till February for your normal in-person adoption hearings. However, we're trying to push for more remote hearings. We will do that the minute it's authorized, and we're trying to also push for in-chamber finalizations to help with this. And we can talk more about this as we go through the call, but I think I've said enough for now.
So, and Cynthia, I assume that the delay, you talked about the delay in adoption hearings, but I assume it's delays all the way across the board in terms of hearings for different steps towards permanence, ending, whether it's reunification, ending reunification, terminating parental rights, or moving towards finalization, everything is slowed down, I assume?
Yes, well, and I've got it in front of me. Right now, until June 22nd, it's extremely limited. It's just these WebEx hearings for basically detentions. Social workers are still writing reports for things like RPP review hearings, things like that. Now on June 22nd, when he phases in, he's going to start hearing adjudications, dispositions, 2-5 hearings, 2-2 hearings, 2-6 hearings. There's a whole prioritization. So yes, they're behind on everything. That is the reason why they're saying they can't schedule normal adoptions until starting in February, which is that all of their resources, which are already limited, are going to first be going towards, oh, we've got to do those disposition hearings. We've got to do those 2-6 hearings. My personal feeling, and on top of that, the Children's Court was already understaffed, was already under everything. The governor has just announced there's going to be a 10% cut in court budget. So I'm not sure how quickly they're bringing back their clerks and how, in terms of the COVID fear. There is a real fear down there. There was an infection that arose in one of the courtrooms shortly after this stay-at-home period. So they're very concerned that they need to limit the number of people there. So it's a problem. And I think in terms of managing expectations, if it helps families at all, it already took a while to get adoptions done at Children's Court. Even once an attorney files an adoption case, it was taking the court 2 to 3 months sometimes to get you your hearing date. So,
yeah,
at a certain point, they reopen in June, July, but it's a problem, and I'm holding out hope that at least maybe late summer, early fall, we will start implementing remote adoption hearings and/or these in-chamber finalizations. And if that's the case, we could sort of I hope, keep this moving.
Yeah, I hope so. I was thinking about it in terms of the kids that we work with specifically, and also just the kids who are waiting, as you said. And the longer kids wait, I think the harder as kids get older, it can get harder to find homes and find placements for them, and there can be some worse outcomes over time. I was thinking about like one family that's very relevant to what you're talking about that we're working with now, working with a preteen, a boy. He's in a prospective adoptive placement. Termination of rights is already, parental rights has already happened, and they were actually set to finalize next month. That was already, there was a date set, I believe, and they got a letter, the letter you're talking about, saying that every adoption finalizations are delayed until February 20 or until 2021. This is a kid who's had multiple prior placements. He had a previous adoptive placement that fell through for different reasons. His siblings are still there. And so I think that it just adds to pre-existing doubts and worries that both he and his current potential adoptive caregiver have had, and so it's leading to a lot of conflict, and hopefully won't be anything worse than that. It'll just be a delay, but it is a big worry, and I think a lot of the kids that we work with have had past losses, past traumas. They have a lot of uncertainty and doubt, and they haven't had a sense of power or control over where they're going to be, and a lot of the resource parents also have had that sense of kind of powerlessness with decision making, court dates, etc. And so I think just COVID has added to the delays and added to and amplified kind of those pre-existing worries and doubts. And so hopefully, it won't lead to too much conflict and disruptions, but it could. And so that is a big worry.
I think the I'm not, I don't have the psychological background and things like that, but what I would say is, for those kids and the families that are feeling insecure, it's a universal feeling. So it's at least to be explained that these delays have nothing to do with their individual case or their individual situation. It truly is a collective outside pandemic that really has put so much pressure, and that a lot of people, including the presiding judge, care very deeply about permanency, but the safety and the protection imperative, has to come first in the setting of the children's courthouse where these have to finalize. And I guess the other thing I would emphasize is there's legal permanency and there's just permanency, which is something we were talking about with Taylor before the call began, that they are existing right now in permanency, in a sense that they are with their loving caregiver. Everything has been approved, more or less, and all that was remaining was sort of the legal touch to it. And so while that is very frustrating, to not have the legal imprint on it, that
As far as the essential cases go, you mentioned for folks moving out of state, potentially children with medical needs, any other sort of emergent issues. How many cases would you say are falling into that category that you've been able to?
Very, very small and narrow.
Okay.
So,
I was wondering how broadly we're construing that definition of emergent.
So let me tell you so you have to look at it two ways. The only actual category of adoptions that formally, under the presiding Judge Bazil's emergency order for the Superior Court, the only type of adoption that's technically officially been categorized as essential and that can proceed right now as through remote adoption hearing, nobody's physically going to the court, is the kids age 17 and that are in a plan of adoption. But Judge Greenberg, sort of off the record, so not under the emergency order, has informed Alliance and Public Counsel, and I spread the word to the private adoption attorneys. We explained to him, what about our families, and DCFS as well, what about our families that legitimately were in the middle of moving out of state? Or what about legitimate medical sort of medical things that might arise. And he simply said, if you send those to me on a case-by-case basis with what the emergency is, I'll look at that. And so far, in the last week, 2 weeks ago, I know that we collectively, being Alliance Public Counsel and a couple of private attorneys, had, I would say, maybe 8 telephonic adoption hearings so far. And of that set, one of mine involved the family that was scheduled to move to Atlanta. The woman, the adopting parent, is a nurse. She legitimately had a job being held up. That one was finalized. Same with another family that was in the middle of a move. They had a lease on another place, real facts showing that they were planning to move. The other one was the child that needed a surgery. So I think the judge will make room for those. He will. But it's not going to be, I don't think he's going to be able to expand it beyond that.
Okay. And then, thank you. It's helpful just to understand the nature of the exception. And then as far as the sort of remote.
Taylor, by the way, okay, go ahead. I think I was going to say about the remote telephone.
More about the remote option, and it sounds like that it's still being explored and the applicability of the emergency order, but just wondering if we have any sort of insight on the timeline and when we can expect to have more insight there.
Well, I think the insight is what I've shared, which is people, I think, need to accept not much is going to change until June 22nd. That's number one. But I think if anything might change, and nothing's going to change in terms of he's not scheduling actual in-court adoption hearings until February 2021. But between June and the end of the year, I would say for remote adoption hearings, this is a staff issue. If I think the more over the last 2 months that they've done the WebEx, the technology is starting to become usable. I've heard that they're looking into even a foundation was going to offer financial support to expand the WebEx or whatnot. So like technologically, when they get that, I think this is truly, Taylor, an issue about literally not having sufficient number of clerks to be able to have the minimum modicum of getting these adoption hearings done. Adoption hearings and also involve the clerks certifying the documents, getting them to the adoption unit clerks. The adoption unit itself is a very skeletal staff right now. It's literally, I think, 2 people. So that's part of it. So that's what I mean, like June 22nd, we all have to kind of see, I don't know, does it mean he's immediately reopening all 25 courtrooms? I don't think so, I'm not sure. So, but I would say, late summer is where I'm just hoping will continue to put pressure. Before COVID, they already had a balancing act going on, trying to fit adoptions in. So I'm starting to now advocate, you have to simply do that. You have to figure it out. And by the way, the Alliance has also worked with Judge Greenberg to advocate a couple other solutions. So adoption days is something that some of you on the call have probably heard of. It's another way to finalize a large number of adoptions, where we would schedule these 4 adoption days per year, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And everybody has their individual hearing, but it's on all those adoptions. So you set aside the afternoon where no dependency cases are heard, and you can hear large numbers of adoption cases. So we had an adoption day scheduled for May 15th that had to be canceled. The one in the summer has been canceled. The one in the fall is almost certainly going to be canceled. But we've been talking to Judge Greenberg about, we understand the reason. Physically, you cannot have that large number of people gathered together. So we're trying to work with him on alternatives. Could we schedule 2 or 3 of these on Saturdays? Stagger people's arrivals, you know, have morning session, afternoon session, spread it out over the day. So I'm still hoping, Taylor, that near the summer, late summer, or no, it's probably unlikely, fall, we might still be able to salvage, you know, 2 or 3 of these sort of adoption Saturdays that are much more spread out, or that we could talk them into sort of a remote adoption day where we schedule all these adoptions on a Saturday telephonically and or through attorneys. So we're working on it, but in terms of families out there, you know, the honest answer is, you know, your actual adoption hearings may not start resuming till February 2021, but we're working hard, especially after June 22, to see if remote hearings could expand. They're very, very doable. The one that I did, the connection was very good with the family. The judge had the opportunity to interact with the family. So we will keep pushing for that. I want everyone to know we'll do our best. We're preparing our families for that. We're sending out all the adoption agreements in advance to have them sign those. It may require going out to a public notary, so you have to be careful and wear your mask, but that's the most that I can say.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. So, Ahab, we've heard a lot about all these delays and maybe even more delays and some questions that still exist around when this can all even happen. I'm wondering, how are families coping with this, and what type of conversations are you having with them? And at all stages, I understand ties may be seeing families that were expecting a termination of parental rights or expecting to finalize. How are these conversations going with the families, and what sort of recommendations might you have for folks on the line who might be similarly situated in that they're working with families that are having to wait?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a real mixed bag. I think on the whole, not surprisingly, most everybody is just under more stress of all different kinds. I do want to say there are certain some people are doing well in many ways in terms of having more family time together. So in terms of positives, some people are doing well in terms of having more family time together. It can be reassuring to some kids if they're getting along with their parents. In families where there are a two-parent household, sometimes a parent who is not as involved in parenting is, you know, now more involved, and so there can be some upsides. And then also in terms of resilience, both you know, we're seeing certainly some families where parents and or kids who've been through a lot and who have coped with many different challenges through their lives are being able to tap into some of the successes that they've had overcoming challenges. And so some of this, I think, is tapping into areas of resilience for parents and kids, and that's a real positive. But on the whole, it's more stressful for the vast majority of our families in most ways. And so we've seen families where they've got threats or losses to their jobs, finances, obviously routines. Most particularly, I would say for parents who are working and have younger kids or kids who have a lot of educational needs, those parents are now trying to balance work and teaching their kids, and it is super stressful. And we have a lot of kids who have different kinds of specialized learning needs. So stress is up for sure. I think also, fortunately at UCLA Ties, and I've seen from a lot of other agencies around, that they are making a quick shift to telehealth. We're using Zoom for a lot of our sessions. We're doing that for individual and family sessions. We're doing that for our support groups. And I think that that's a real positive. On the other hand, you know, I think there was probably an increased need for mental health services and less availability, absolutely, for in-person access, which I would have to say in most cases is better, but it's great that we've got the option to do telehealth. And then hopefully, you know, there's worries that there would be decreased funding over time. So I hope that's not the case. but I would certainly recommend families to access the supports that they've got, natural supports, and then also if you have access to get services at ties or through other mental health providers, I would recommend it. I think support groups are huge if for kids and for parents to connect to other folks who are going through the same kind of worries and stresses and frustrations. It's really important to try to access those supports.
Definitely. We talked a little bit about permanency as being something that really is applicable throughout the lifetime of a child and of a family, and that even when an adoption finalizes, permanency can still be challenging for some families, largely due to services or special needs that the child or family may have. I'm wondering what issues you're seeing, AHOB, with respect to families experiencing some challenges or in need of additional support during this time with respect to permanency.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We work with both non-finalized and finalized families. We were talking a little bit beforehand. There's, one example is a family that was coping relatively well, but they had existing stressors. It was two parents with 3 kids, finalized adoption, and all of the kids were getting mental health services, and at least 2 are needing a lot of services in school as well. Anyway, this family pre-COVID was going through separation and divorce, and the mom ended up moving with the 3 kids to different places, got settled. Dad moved to another area, and then COVID hit. So now mom is working full time, caring for all 3 kids, managing their schooling, trying to work early mornings, late nights, get her work done in between, setting up sessions for Zoom sessions for school for all the kids. And then she got sick, and so ended up having to, essentially in relative desperation, get in touch with the father who had to come back and really help out during this period of time. And so it just puts families even that are doing relatively well but with pre-existing stress, under a lot of extra stress, and could create threats to permanence, certainly. So luckily she's doing better right now, so I'm happy to report that. But it's it puts even finalized families at risk.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Taylor?
Cynthia?
Oh, I just wanted to mention in terms of support to families that have already finalized their adoptions or families that are in the process and waiting now. The Alliance does have has a resource on its website, kids-alliance.org/COVID-19. We do have a listing of resources under coming together during the COVID-19 outbreak that includes a lot of links for families that are struggling right now, whether it's food assistance, healthcare, housing. Some of this is geared towards our transition age youth. But that website, it's really good. Who's putting it together at the Alliance? It's got links to local and state guidance, things like that, and also to recommendations that our policy team made that I think have helped families where, for example, the governor recently announced some additional funding and payments that can go to families. Those may be families that are in family reunification, but some measures we've taken to ensure that there's no disruption in people's funding, families that are going through the RFA process, that they can still get emergency funding, things like that. There are other advocacy work that the Alliance and many other nonprofits are doing to try to help support families that are under the financial stress that AHOB was mentioning. So that one link would be the resource I was going to suggest if people want to sort of look into that and get connected.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I put the link to the Alliance's website in the chat. And I also wanted to share with our audience that the UCLA Pritzker Center created quite a few resources around all of these issues. So I put that link into the chat as well. You'll find those resources linked in both English and in Spanish. And they include some of the Alliance's resources as well as many other resources for families. So please consider checking those out, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you.
Taylor, one other thing I wanted to mention along the lines of what Ahab was saying, another positive way for families to look at this, if there's any positive, is that to the extent that there were still any outstanding issues pre-adoption finalization that families were having, whether it was they were still waiting for the proper assessment, by the regional center, or they were not receiving the right level of adoption assistance payments in the first place, the adoption attorney representing you, especially if it's the Alliance, those programs continue. We can continue working during this time of waiting. It seems like useless time. We're just waiting, but we're really not. So if there are families that had some issues that they were still a little worried about, we can probably, this is a good time to get those solved with DCFS. Things still taking a little slower, even for example, regional centers. Oh, there's so many issues there getting services, but work with the IEP at school, our education attorneys can help with, there's ways we can sort of try to take advantage of this time to further strengthen that adoption before it actually closes out from the system. And then even after, still connect families to places like UCLA Ties for Adoption, which is critical. All that work continue. It's still just a phone call away. We can continue to work on that and strengthen families' confidence as they wait for their adoption hearing.
I think that, yeah.
Trying to be positive.
I think that's a great point. I was thinking about it too for families we have that are pre-adoption, where either the parent and or the child is hesitant for whatever reason, either in terms of how they're getting along or birth family connections or whatever it may be. And so the idea of having a little bit more time to be more sure. I realize it can also create conflict and doubt, but for some families, having a little more time, and so particularly for kids and even sometimes parents, not feeling too rushed by the court process and to feel like they can make a really conscious, informed decision about whether or not to move forward, I think can be a helpful thing, can be a good thing.
Yes, I agree.
That's a great way of looking at it. Certainly it's making the most of where we're at and what we can do and what's within our control. Cynthia, you mentioned there's 3,200 children that are currently legally freed,
yes,
waiting. Are most of those children, or if not all of them, currently in a family, or are some of them waiting to still locate a family?
I can give you the exact answer to that. I'm going to reopen this. So this is per DCFS data. Pardon me while I look to the left so I can open this document. If I can find it quickly. Let's see. Here we go. So according to the work group, the Office of Child Protection Permanency work group that I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're doing is, or Judge Nash is doing, is pushing for accurate data from DCFS about the number of kids. So according to their data, of the 3,200 kids that have been legally freed with a plan of adoption, they are at various stages, but supposedly almost 2,000, so 1,945 of these are already adoptively placed. So so let's just round that up to 2,000. So that means that 2,000 are sort of on their way. So that leaves, then it says, how many adoptions, so what's the difference? 32, so about 1,200 are not even yet adoptively placed. So now of that 1,200, it's how many have been free that are not in an adoptive plan? It says 93. don't think that's right. My sense of how many kids that DCFS and the foster family agencies are actively recruiting for, meaning they're not matched with a family, even though they were legally freed, is more like between 400 and 500 children. Those are the harder to adopt children that maybe have not been matched. But even a little more worrisome, they've provided a number of how many children are just waiting for their 2-6 hearing. So they had family reunification services terminated. They're moving to have the 2-6 termination hearing. That is 4,500 kids. So that's where some of my alarm comes from is, there's a large, this is why Judge Greenberg is really strapped right now. He's got all of these thousands of hearings pending. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did. Thank you. And I think it speaks to the importance of moving the existing cases forward, understanding that there is a large group of children that are expected to need adoption very soon once their parental rights are terminated. So it only compounds the need to do the adoptions fast.
Yes, and that was part of my message early on in this call, which is completely apart from COVID-19, which unfortunately has just introduced tremendous pressure into the system, and to the families. Again, it's already a situation where the numbers were rising, and but the positive side is, at a minimum, there is this permanency work group that was trying to help come up with pressure. But it's important in the larger perspective for policymakers, for the UCLA Center, to continue to focus on, budget cuts always land on children and elderly, it seems like. More money, more budget, more staff, more resources need to go to the front end and the recruitment side of finding more families for these children, not cutting court budgets, and the opposite is happening, so that more staff can be brought in to the courts to process this high volume of cases. It's a real tension right now that is but your point is well taken. It doesn't help that this new backlog has been created at the back end.
So Cynthia and Ahab, we have just a few minutes left, and we've been asking all of our presenters for any ideas that they may have around how UCLA and our students and our faculty and our staff can be helpful during this time. And if you have any ideas on ways that we can help.
I'll have Ahab, you go first.
Okay, I think for families who can access UCLA ties and make use of the services for the kids or the parent support, I think, please come our way. I know the Pritzker Center has the resource list that you mentioned. I think that is useful. I also wanted to mention that DCFS has the Adoption Promotion and Support Services Program, which for families where they're thinking about, even hesitant about adoption, but that is a possibility. They can access pre-finalized or even post-finalized post-adoption. Can contact the Adoption Promotion and Support Services Program within DCFS. They can get referred potentially to UCLA or to other agencies throughout LA County that provide. All the staff have to be have some adoption sensitivity and be adoption trained. So that's one way to access ties, or if you're not near ties, to access services throughout LA County. So those are some recommendations.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah, I think in terms of policy recommendations, I'm not so much sure I have those to make, other than, I'd really like the Judicial Council to adopt that emergency rule, which, even if it is adopted, it will merely be advisory, meaning it's still going to be within the discretion of the presiding judge, whether they have the ability to implement it. But I think that that's something that should happen. And, you know, policy in terms of support for caregivers, you know, continue to focus on that. Where UCLA Center is so effective, where UCLA Ties is so effective, is that critical importance of supporting caregivers, supporting the children with services, whether it's regional center, mental health, you know, special needs through the fetal alcohol syndrome, and the you know, continuing to create partnerships there that, you know, it's really supporting the special needs, like you said earlier with permanency. The legal finalization is one thing, but children that have been through the foster care system, they do have needs that evolve over time, and parents need support that's unique. And so I think the center does a fantastic job of building up both the public resources for that, and the private partnerships to support that. It's kind of vague, but that's where we're at right now.
Great. Well, thanks, Cynthia. And certainly, you know, to the extent that student volunteers may be helpful in the future, please feel free to call on us anytime to help. I can imagine that we'd be able to recruit quite a few students to volunteer in any way with adoption day or virtual proceedings or anything else relating to the services provided at the Alliance.
Thank you. I mean, one area where we have a strong need for volunteers also is our monolingual, our Spanish speakers, bilingual. We are getting a lot of cases from DCFS right now, and trying to prepare them, which involves very detailed interviews we do with the families. It's a really good volunteer activity that a lot of students could provide for us, especially now that we're moving towards virtual. A lot of things can be done. So that's a very good point, Taylor. I may want to tap into your stream of volunteer students, because we have a need for help with that.
Great. Well, we would love that, Cynthia. We'll follow up with you there.
Okay.
So we have just 3 minutes left. Just a logistical matter. If you're a student and you need proof of attendance, please submit that request now. For our speakers, thank you so much. This has been so insightful, and I think, you know, we could be frustrated, and I think rightfully so, that some of these adoptions will be delayed for some time, but to the extent that we can use this time to really ensure that families have what they need and that they're well equipped when the adoption finally does happen, I think it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that access, and so we thank you for highlighting that. As far as some suggestions or resources go for those who may still want them, we put the UCLA Ties website in the chat. If you're interested in fostering or adopting, we put the link to the DCFS website in the chat for more information on becoming a foster parent. If you have specific questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me and we can direct you accordingly, at least with respect to LA County. I apologize, we don't have as much of a reach outside of LA, but I'm happy to connect you with those who do. And then lastly, if there's anything else or any other suggestions that you might have as an attendee or other topics you'd like us to explore, please feel free to reach out to us. And we have 2 more sessions in the speaker series. Cheyenne put that in the chat as well, so please consider joining us. And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much to our speakers. And let's all give them a round of applause for joining us today. And to all of our attendees, we thank you so much for being a part of our discussion. It means a lot to us. Please let us know how we can continue to help. We appreciate you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.